everyone. Stacy and I are back this week with another ISG HR Market Pulse update. In our last segment, we shared some tips for evaluating HR technology virtually. And today, we thought we'd kind of continue on that journey. So we're back to talk about what happens after you've made your selection and you're preparing for that next big activity, deployment. There's a lot that goes into getting your organization ready for a technology implementation. So we thought we'd spend some time today talking about the key deployment readiness activities. Stacy, why don't you start us off with project readiness?
Thanks, Kelly. So yes, one of the key strategies around really de-risking an HCM implementation and setting that strong foundation for success is a robust, readiness phase, which often is called phase 0. And so we did highlight here a handful of areas that we felt really are critical readiness activities and ones that could begin, even before you've selected your SI partner. So the first one here is project readiness. And so the detailed project planning and resourcing is really one of the areas that we continue to find, is the biggest issue. So we find organizations often, underestimate the resourcing need and really don't augment, the current staff, appropriately with some, whether it's temporary resources or new hires or others, so that they can really focus on the success of the implementation. And so, don't assume that resources can both manage the day-to-day work and largely be devoted to the project at the same time. And so it really does require kind of, scrutinizing the resource estimates and, candid in terms of, is this the best case scenario? Does it include all the internal work that needs to be done around building out the support processes, for example? So we'd say the time to really take to build out an integrated project plan that does take into account kind of not just the third parties and the technical side of the implementation, but all of the internal resources that really are required as well, to be successful. We often find that the HCM partners and the SI, partners are typically focused on those activities that really focus on more the technical side of the implementation, and the amount of time really required around making sure the successful ongoing operations can often be overlooked. And so, really we say, lock in the resource commitments on all sides, make sure that you really take into account all of the deployment activities. And then keeping in mind, with deployments now happening remotely, you may also need to build in a little extra time, with the plan. Everyone right now is, somewhat overwhelmed, I think, with the volume of meetings. And so, it may likely require a lot of advanced, scheduling here as well. So Kelly, that kind of moves us when we talk about ensuring successful ongoing operations. Do you want to hit on the next topic here, which is really around the process readiness?
Yeah, absolutely, Stacy. So, deploying a new system can definitely present a great opportunity to improve your HR processes, especially when you're moving from an older system onto a new SaaS platform where you're going to have much more options around self-service and automated approval. But oftentimes, we see our clients needing to do some work to harmonize their processes as they prepare to deploy that new technology. When you think about deployment, one of the first activities is going to be around design. And your organization is going to need to, be ready to make decisions about how you want to design your processes for the new platform and new system. So it's really important before you head into those discussions to do some upfront work around reviewing your current processes so that you understand the opportunities and pain points, and also have some alignment around, what you want your processes to look like in the future as you're heading into those discussions. Of course, we know trying to harmonize processes across your geographies or your business units can definitely be a daunting process. One of the things, that we do when we're working with clients is encourage them to develop a set of guiding principles that you can really refer to as an organization's making decisions and working toward alignment. So when we think about the types of things to address in those guiding principles, you want to cover things like adoption of best practices, right? What's your position on best practices for your organization? I know, we coach clients not to try to recreate their current processes on the new technology, but really take an opportunity to rethink your processes with an eye toward that new platform, and align to best practice as much as possible. Another thing we would, encourage a guiding principles around is kind of having a position on self-service and approvals. So there will be more options around self-service likely in your new platform, or additional automated workflow. There'll be potentially increased visibility and access to data. And so you want to give some thought organizationally to how much, do you as an organization want to push to self-service? Where do you want to streamline approvals? Where do you really need an active approval in a process where, versus being able to eliminate approvals and just provide visibility through a report or an online screen? So good things to think about there as well. Of course, as you think about harmonizing, where is it appropriate and where do you want to allow for variations? Is it legal, really down to just a legal reason only? Are there some other business-driven reasons? You want to apply that 80-20 rule, right? So things to think about from that perspective as well. And then, you don't want to forget about the service delivery impacts as you think about your processes. It's really important to think about how do you redesign your processes in a way that can also improve service delivery, which is, often hopefully an outcome of your technology implementation as well. So, overall, as organizations approach process readiness, I would say think about the end-to-end process and touch points. Encourage you to align to best practices as much as possible, and aim for some streamlining of your processes that can clarify roles and minimize approvals. And of course, there's a lot of opportunity oftentimes, so it's important to do that initial assessment and do some prioritization of opportunities to make sure that you're focusing on areas where you can make some impacts around, significant impacts around service delivery and supporting the future model that you're trying to drive to. So those are some of my thoughts and highlights around the process readiness piece. Stacey, you want to talk a bit about data readiness?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, and agree that getting alignment around those key guiding principles is critical early and can be leveraged throughout, the implementation. In terms of, data readiness, similar to what you talked about on the process side, many organizations find there's also significant work to do around preparing and harmonizing the data. So capturing, what is the source system, ensuring that there's clean and normalized data, understanding what needs to be transformed and what the clear path forward is in terms of that strategy and creating governance around the data. So all of those are areas that we find, organizations can really benefit from addressing early. And, when it gets to implementation, I think consistently we've seen, that there are gaps in the data conversion strategy, development of the data conversion files. And so it does require, a well thought out strategy and time to address kind of issues or concerns that may need to be socialized with, key stakeholders as well as the third parties. So, certainly as we think about HCM implementations and, some of the most important objectives can be around access to the data and the change to a more data-driven organization. So it's an important, component to look at early. And as we think about kind of the change management side that goes along with us, that moves us to our next area. So Kelly, do you want to talk about change readiness?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, all these things we're talking about around process and data certainly will amount to a lot of change in the organization. And change management is just so important to a successful deployment. Stacey, I don't think you or I have come across a client yet that says, we had all the change management that we needed for this project.
Exactly.
So, definitely, an important area. In fact, there's a stat that we often share with clients that says, around 70% of implementation failures are a result of change management issues. So let's talk about some of those key things that you can do to make sure you're addressing change management early and hitting it head on. And, you mentioned stakeholders, I think from a data perspective, from a change perspective too, you want to think about your stakeholders at all levels, who are your senior leadership stakeholders within the business, Of course, the HR roles that are going to be impacted, and then of course the managers and employees. We can't forget the end users who are going to be asking to do processes in a different way, and potentially and have some new experiences there. So as you consider all of these stakeholders, then think about how can you stay connected with them throughout your deployment. Not only to keep them informed, but to make sure you're keeping them excited and engaged as well about the new platform and new technology that you're rolling out. You can help set up your deployment for success by establishing the good communication channels and vehicles early on. So, think about those stakeholders and good ways to connect with them. Are you an email-driven organization? Do you have, physical or online places where you can post information? Are there team meetings, town halls, things that you want to make sure you're tapping into to hit all those stakeholder groups continually throughout the deployment? Training is another key element when you think about change. And so, we see it's important to conduct some training needs analysis and figure out where you can and should provide some training to help build the skills and confidence that are going to drive adoption of your new technology and processes. And one of the ways you can sort of tap into and get a good change approach together is by conducting a change readiness or change impact assessment. To really help assess your organization's appetite for change and figure out some of the areas where you may have resistance or need to do a little bit more on the change front to get folks excited. And then finally, as you think about all of this, it's really key to make sure you have alignment at the top and that you have a good, executive sponsorship that's going to set the right tone, help drive the change and step in to keep things on track and keep people engaged throughout the project. So change readiness is definitely a key element. And then that brings us to the last one here around risk readiness. So Stacey, I'll send it back to you to cover that.
Yeah, so this last area on risk readiness, we're seeing more and more organizations really want to address risk as part of their readiness activities early on. And so while each project certainly has its unique challenges, we find there are common risks that often arise, on complex, HCM and cloud ERP, system implementations at each stage. So whether it's the planning, the design, architecture, configure, test, or deployment, we see a similar set of lessons learned that are arising from each of those stages. And those risks, span the categories of people, process, and technology. And so, for example, not having the right subject matter experts or the business involved in the design early on, or not testing the full end-to-end business process in testing, or maybe scheduling issues and not engaging third parties for, some of the interface needs and, well enough in advance, or the lack of hypercare support, maybe post-go live. And so, we suggest documenting, these key risks by each phase of the project and identifying what are the key mitigating actions that you can take to address those? And you may want to consider something like a half-day workshop, with a partner who can share some of the top lessons learned from implementations and really help identify early, those areas that can often, derail or delay implementations. So those are, a handful of areas that we really wanted to make sure that we called out as critical readiness activities. There's others as well, but these are ones that we find continually rise to the surface. About, implementing a new technology, it's an exciting opportunity to introduce, enhanced self-service, to improve the user experience, to drive new innovation, get access to data and really help drive the organization forward. And so we strongly recommend building in readiness activities and kind of a phase 0 in your project so that you can de-risk the implementation and really set that strong foundation, for success to get the most out of your technology investments. So with that, we thank you for joining today. And as always, encourage you to join our network. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.